Fuel pressure on the number 2 tank dropped through amber into red, and First Officer Dale Whitfield's hand froze over the checklist. Captain, we're losing fuel faster than the math allows. That's not a sensor glitch. Captain Renata Cole didn't blink. She watched the gauge fall, calm as still water, while somewhere below the cabin lights flickered and a flight attendant's voice caught mid-sentence over the intercom. Then the weather radar screen died to black. No terrain, no traffic, no storm cells, just a gray nothing where the world used to be. Radar's gone, Dale said, voice cracking. We've got no backup up here, no relay, nothing. Renata reached for the mic, thumb steady on the transmit switch. Highland Center, this is Continental Sky 447. We have a fuel leak, no radar, and I need every resource you've got. A pause on the other end lasted 3 seconds too long. Then a controller's voice came back, quieter than protocol allowed. 447, say again your captain's name. If you've ever wondered what happens when a person built for exactly this moment has been hiding in plain sight for 20 years, stay with this one until the very end, because in about 11 minutes, an air traffic controller in a quiet room is going to hear a name he buried a long time ago, and nothing about this flight will look the same again. If stories like this pull you in, consider sticking around. This channel exists for exactly these moments. Because right now, 31,000 feet over the Cascade High Country, with fuel bleeding out of a punctured line and no eyes on the world outside the windshield, Renata Cole was about to become someone the cabin behind her had never met. Her name on the manifest read Renata Cole, age 54, 17 years flying for Continental Sky, spotless record, quiet reputation for never raising her voice in a cockpit. That was the cover. The truth sat 2 decades deep, filed under a designation most people in this business had never heard spoken aloud. Before Continental Sky, before commercial checklists and passenger manifests, she had been Major Renata Cole, call sign Marlowe, an electronic warfare and strike pilot who flew classified penetration missions nobody wrote citations for. In 2003, during a nighttime extraction operation over a mountain corridor codenamed Kestrel Ridge, her aircraft took anti-air fire, lost all communications, and went down in weather so thick the recovery teams called off the search after 6 days. The official record listed her as killed in action. She had, in fact, ejected into a ravine, broken 2 ribs, and walked 11 miles before a farmer found her. The Air Force quietly reclassified her file, folded the mission into silence, and offered her a choice: stay a ghost with a pension or vanish and start over. She chose to fly commercial, under her real name, because hiding the name felt like betraying the people who hadn't made out. Nobody at Continental Sky knew. Dale Whitfield, 29, sharp with the tablet and the automation but green in real crisis, trusted the airplane's computers more than the woman beside him. Until today, when the computers went dark first. Systems don't just die like this, he muttered, running the checklist twice. Renata's eyes stayed on the fuel gauge. She had seen systems die exactly like this before, a long time ago, on a night she'd spent 20 years trying not to remember out loud. The flight had started ordinary enough. Continental Sky 447, a Boeing 787 out of Portland bound for Denver, 91 passengers, a light crosswind at departure, nothing on the forecast worth a second look. Dale had run the pre-flight with the easy confidence of someone who'd logged 4,000 hours and never once needed to improvise. Auto throttle's locked. FMS routing looks clean. We'll have smooth air the whole way, he said, tapping through the display like it was gospel. Renata nodded, but kept her own scan running the old way. Fuel flow, oil pressure, hydraulic quantity cross-checked by hand, the habit of someone who'd once flown an aircraft that lied to her instruments on purpose. 40 minutes into the climb, a soft chime sounded. A minor caution light for the number 2 fuel pump, gone as quickly as it appeared. Transient, Dale said, waving it off. Sensor probably needs recalibrating at the next check. Renata logged it anyway, quietly, in the notebook she kept in her breast pocket instead of the tablet everyone else used. Over the cabin speaker, a flight attendant named Priya Anand chatted easily with a nervous first-time flyer in 14C, a college student clutching a stuffed elephant like it might file a flight plan of its own. Ordinary, peaceful, the kind of leg that fills up a logbook without a single interesting line. But 12,000 feet higher, the fuel gauge for Tank 2 ticked down 4 pounds faster than the burn rate accounted for, and nobody but Renata noticed the math didn't close. By the 90-minute mark, the discrepancy had grown from 4 pounds to 11. Renata ran the numbers twice, said nothing, and quietly adjusted her mental fuel reserve calculations the way she'd been trained 20 years earlier. Assume the worst, verify, then act. Dale, cross-check Tank 2 burn against total fuel flow for me, she said, keeping her voice level. He did did it again. That's odd. We're 12 pounds off from projected. Could be instrumentation drift. Could be, Renata said. Let's watch it. She wasn't watching it casually. She was running silent contingency math, nearest suitable airports, terrain elevation along the corridor, weather fronts building over the cascades that hadn't been in the morning briefing. Below, unnoticed by anyone in economy, a hairline crack in a fuel transfer line, the result of a maintenance seal that had degraded 3 flights earlier and been signed off as within tolerance, had begun to widen under vibration and cold-soak stress. Dale leaned back, still unconcerned. Boeing builds redundancy into everything. Even if a sensor's off, the aircraft compensates. Renata almost smiled. She had flown aircraft that compensated right into mountainsides because the compensation logic assumed a normal failure, not a cascading one. Systems compensate for problems they're designed to expect, she said quietly. Not the ones nobody planned for. Dale didn't answer. Outside, a bank of gray weather rolled toward their flight path, and the fuel gauge dropped another 6 pounds in under 2 minutes. The leak no longer subtle, no longer something instrumentation drift could explain away. Captain, Tank 2 just dropped 9 pounds in 90 seconds, Dale said, sitting up straight now, all his easy confidence gone. That's not drift. That's a leak. Renata was already reaching for the checklist, her voice steady even as her pulse quickened. Copy. Initiate fuel leak procedure. Crossfeed off, isolate Tank 2, and give me current position relative to nearest suitable diversion. Dale's hands moved fast, but not smoothly, the tablet lagging half a second behind his intentions. Nearest options are Redmond or back to Portland, both about equal distance. Start the diversion request to Highland Center now, Renata said. Don't wait for confirmation from me on the numbers. Just get the call started. As Dale kept his hand on the radio, the fuel imbalance light illuminated, followed almost immediately by a soft shudder through the airframe. Subtle, but Renata felt it the way a mechanic feels an engine about to seize. She keyed the intercom. Priya, secure the cabin for a possible diversion. Keep it calm. No announcements about fuel yet. In the back, Priya's easy smile faltered for half a second before she moved down the aisle, murmuring reassurance to passengers who had no idea anything was wrong. The student in 14C looked up from her stuffed elephant and asked if the plane was supposed to shake like that. Priya told her it was normal turbulence. It wasn't. Up front, Renata watched a second caution light blink on beside the first. And for the first time since the leak began, she allowed herself one full breath before doing what she'd trained her whole life to do under exactly this kind of pressure. Highland Center answered fast, a controller named Walt Reyes picking up the transmission with the practiced calm of a man who had talked pilots through worse. Continental Sky 447, Highland Center, go ahead with your request. Dale relayed the fuel leak, the imbalance, the request for vectors toward Redmond. Walt acknowledged, already coordinating with radar handoffs, when his screen flickered, a full data dropout, the kind that shouldn't happen on a system with triple redundancy. 447, be advised, we're showing an intermittent radar return on your position. Can you confirm your transponder is squawking normally? In the cockpit, Renata's own display blinked, then dimmed, then returned with garbled data. Dale, cycle the transponder, and give me a manual position cross-check using GPS and dead reckoning both. He did, hands faster now, adrenaline finally burning off the last of his overconfidence. Transponders cycled, still showing intermittent on their end. Walt's voice came back, tighter. 447, be advised, We've lost your radar return 3 times in the last 90 seconds. If you go fully dark, we will have no eyes on you over the mountain corridor. Renata absorbed that the way she absorbed every piece of bad news, filed, prioritized, not allowed to become panic. She had flown blind over worse terrain than this with worse odds. But those flights had wingmen. Backup. A recovery team on standby. This flight had 91 civilians, a green first officer, and a fuel leak that was about to make radar the least of their problems. The fuel leak announced itself fully at 11,000 feet into the descent, when Tank 2's quantity indicator dropped through the reserve threshold in under 4 minutes. Far faster than any leak Dale had studied in training. We're losing it fast, Captain, faster than the checklist accounts for. Renata's hands moved without hesitation, cutting crossfeed entirely, isolating the compromised line, running fuel priority to the healthy tank, while mentally recalculating range on the fly. Highland, 447, fuel leak has accelerated, requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable runway. We may not make Redmond. Walt's voice, when it came back, carried the particular strain of a controller watching a screen with no reliable return. 447, radar contact intermittent. We're working blind on our end too. Nearest field is Bell Rock Regional, 18 miles, but terrain along that corridor is significant, and we cannot confirm your exact position with confidence. In the cabin, the shudder from earlier returned, stronger now, and this time passengers felt it. A ripple of gasps moved down the rows. Priya's voice came over the intercom, calm but pitched carefully, asking everyone to fasten seatbelts for what she called routine turbulence. The student in 14C gripped her stuffed elephant so hard its seams started to give. Up front, a warning tone chimed. Low fuel pressure on the remaining functional tank, a secondary symptom nobody had expected this early. Dale's face had gone pale. Captain, if that tank starts losing pressure too, we don't have the fuel margin to reach Bell Rock. Renata's jaw tightened just slightly. Then we make our own margin. Cabin crew, prepare for possible emergency landing procedures, Renata said over the intercom, her voice deliberately even, pitched to inform without inciting panic. Behind the curtain, Priya moved through the aisles with practiced calm, though her hands trembled slightly as she checked seatbelts row by row. A businessman in 9A asked, too loudly, if they were going to die. Priya told him, firmly and kindly, that the crew had this handled. She didn't know yet if that was true. In the cockpit, Dale ran the numbers again, voice tight. Even with crossfeed isolated, we're burning contingency fuel, just staying level. If we can't confirm Bell Rock's exact bearing without radar, we could overshoot into terrain. Renata pulled a paper chart from her flight bag, the kind almost nobody carried anymore, and began cross-referencing landmarks against dead reckoning. The same skill that had once saved her life over unmapped mountains with no satellite guidance at all. Dale, give me airspeed, heading, and time since last confirmed fix. He read the numbers. She did the math in her head, faster than the flight computer would have managed, even if it had been working. We adjust heading 2 degrees south. That puts Bell Rock inside our glide margin if the engine quits entirely. Dale stared at her. You're navigating this like radar doesn't exist. Because right now, it doesn't, she said. Below them, Hollensitter's radar flickered back to life for 11 seconds. Just long enough for Walt Reyes to see a flight path correction so precise it looked less like an emergency response and more like a maneuver someone had drilled 1,000 times before. Walt Reyes stared at his scope, radar returned flickering back into existence exactly where it shouldn't have been if the pilot were flying blind and guessing. Supervisor, get over here, he called, voice tight. His supervisor, a woman named Carla Finn with 20 years in the tower, leaned over his shoulder. That correction, that's not luck. That's dead reckoning executed like a textbook demonstration. Carla's eyes narrowed. Give me everything on the aircraft commander. While the ground scrambled for answers, the cockpit fought its own battle. A second warning chime sounded. Hydraulic pressure fluctuating on the primary system, a cascading failure nobody in the pre-flight brief had anticipated. Captain, hydraulics are acting up now too, Dale said, and for the first time his voice cracked entirely. the confidence of the morning fully gone. This isn't supposed to happen all at once. Renata's hands moved to the backup hydraulic switch without looking, muscle memory older than Dale's entire career. It's not supposed to. It is. Focus on what's in front of you, not what should be happening. In the cabin, the shudder had become a rhythmic vibration passengers could feel in their teeth. Priya knelt beside the student in 14C, whose stuffed elephant had been squeezed nearly flat, and told her, quietly, that the pilots flying this plane were the best in the sky. She had no way of knowing how true that was. Up front, Renata scanned the instrument panel one more time, cataloging every failing system with the calm of someone who had lost far more than hydraulics before and lived to fly again anyway. Highland 447, we've now got a hydraulic fluctuation on primary, in addition to the fuel leak and intermittent radar. Renata transmitted, her voice a flat, controlled monotone that betrayed nothing of the mounting complexity in her cockpit. Walt Reyes relayed the update to Carla Finn, who was already on a second line requesting military assistance from the regional air defense sector. Standard procedure for any aircraft experiencing multiple cascading system failures near mountainous terrain. The answer came back fast and unwelcome. No fighter escort currently on ready alert within response range. Nearest unit is Elm Ridge Air National Guard, F-16s, but they're mid-exercise and would need at least 11 minutes to scramble. Carla related to Walt, who related, reluctantly, to the cockpit. 447, be advised, no immediate military backup available. Closest unit needs 11 minutes minimum. In the cockpit, Dale's hands tightened on the yoke. He wasn't even flying. No radar, no backup, and now hydraulics. Captain, what's our actual plan here? Renata didn't answer immediately. She was running scenarios the way she used to run them in briefing rooms before missions nobody was allowed to name afterward. Worst case, most likely case, best case, and a narrow band of decisions that moved you from one toward the other. Our plan, she said finally, is that we fly this airplane like every system we don't have is a system we never needed in the first place. Dale stared at her, unsettled by how calm that sentence sounded coming from someone he'd only ever seen fly with the automation doing most of the work. The 11-minute wait for military backup felt, in the cockpit, like 11 hours compressed into 11 minutes. Renata flew manual approach headings using chart, compass, and a mental map built from memory and instinct, correcting Dale's instrument cross-checks twice when residual system errors nearly sent them 2 degrees off a heading that mattered. Trust the numbers I give you over what the panel shows, she told him, and something in her tone, not harsh but absolute, made him comply without argument for the first time all flight. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin held its collective breath through a series of shudders that felt, to 91 strangers, like the end of something. Priya moved row to row, repeating the same steady phrase to anyone who asked. The people flying this plane know exactly what they're doing. She said it so many times it started to feel less like reassurance and more like a prayer she needed to believe herself. On the ground, Carla Finn pulled up the aircraft commander certification file while waiting on the Elm Ridge scramble confirmation, scanning routine information, type ratings, hours, base certifications, until she reached a field that made her stop entirely. A cross-reference flag, buried in a database rarely queried outside of Federal Aviation Security reviews, linked the name Renata Cole to a classified service record sealed under a designation Carla hadn't seen used in 15 years. She sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, and said quietly, to no one in particular, "That name is supposed to be dead." 11 minutes later, 2 F-16s lifted off from Elm Ridge Air National Guard Base, call signs Falcon 2 and Falcon 4, flown by Major Tracy Sondheim and her wingman, First Lieutenant Owen Basra. Sondheim's voice came over the guard frequency clipped and focused. Highland, Falcon Flight Airborne, 6 minutes to intercept, requesting last known position and status of the aircraft in distress. Walt relayed coordinates built from Renata's own dead reckoning corrections, numbers so precise Sondheim double-checked them against her own instruments before believing them. These coordinates are unusually tight for an aircraft flying without functioning radar, she said to Basra over their private channel. Somebody up there knows exactly what they're doing. At Elm Ridge, Colonel Marcus Ibarra, the wing commander, monitored the unfolding situation from operations, jaw tight, aware that a civilian airliner with multiple system failures over mountainous terrain was, statistically, a tragedy waiting to happen. He'd overseen enough real emergencies to know how rarely they resolved cleanly. Then his phone rang. Carla Finn, calling directly instead of through normal channels, her voice tight with something between disbelief and urgency. "Colonel, I need you to look at a name on my screen before this goes any further." Ibarra listened, said nothing for a long moment, then asked her to repeat it once more, slowly. When she did, something in his face changed entirely. The look of a man confronting a ghost he'd spent 2 decades believing had stayed buried on a mountainside on the other side of the world. "Renata Cole," Ibarra repeated, quieter this time, almost to himself. He had commanded a support squadron during the Kestrel Ridge operation, had personally signed off on the search and rescue stand-down order after 6 days of silence, had attended a private memorial for a pilot with no recoverable remains. "That's not possible. She went down in 2003. I was there." Carla's voice was steady but insistent. "Colonel, the aircraft commander flying Continental Sky 447 has that exact name, that exact date of birth, and a certification history that goes suspiciously quiet for a 2-year period right around when your operation happened." Ibarra closed his eyes briefly, the weight of 2 decades pressing down at once. He'd carried Kestrel Ridge as one of his heaviest losses, a pilot he'd respected, gone on a mission so classified the official cause of death still read training accident in files meant for families who'd never know the truth. "Give me a direct line to Falcon Flight," he said, voice rougher now. "And give me a direct line to that aircraft. I need to hear the voice myself." Above the Cascades, unaware that a name from her past was rippling through a command center miles away, Renata guided her crippled aircraft through a valley corridor using nothing but instinct, memory, and a compass heading she trusted more than any digital display. The hydraulic fluctuation had stabilized, barely, but the fuel gauge told a story, with an ending arriving faster than anyone below had time to fully prepare for. "Falcon Flight, Highland Center, patching you through to a priority line. Stand by," Walt Reyes said, voice unusually formal. Sondheim frowned in her cockpit, exchanging a glance-equivalent glance with Basra over the radio static. "Copy, standing by." A moment later, Colonel Ibarra's voice came through, tighter and older-sounding than either pilot had heard from him before. "Falcon 2, once you have visual and radio contact with Continental Sky 447, I need you to request the aircraft commander's full name, verbally, over open frequency. Immediately." Sondheim hesitated. "Copy, Colonel. May I ask why?" "You may not," Ibarra said. "Just do it." 6 minutes later, the 2 F-16s broke through a bank of cloud and caught first visual on the wounded 787. One engine trailing a faint haze of vapor that shouldn't have been there. The airframe holding a heading with a precision that struck Sondheim as almost unervingly deliberate for an aircraft supposedly flying blind. "Continental Sky 447, this is Falcon 2. We have you visual. We are your escort. Please confirm aircraft commander's name for our operations center." There was a brief pause on the frequency. Not hesitation, Sondheim would later realize, but the particular pause of someone deciding whether the moment had finally come. Then a voice, calm as still water despite everything happening around it, came through clean and clear. "Falcon 2, this is Captain Renata Cole, aircraft commander, Continental Sky 447. We could use your eyes out here." In the operations room, Colonel Ibarra sat down slowly, both hands flat on the console, staring at nothing. The name landed in Ibarra's operations center like a dropped weight. A junior officer nearby noticed the color leave the colonel's face and asked if he needed anything. Ibarra waved him off, staring at the live audio feed, replaying in his headset. "Renata Cole," he said again, testing whether saying it twice made it more or less real. Carla Finn, patched into the same line from Highland Center, spoke carefully. "Colonel, whatever you know about her, that pilot up there is currently flying a crippled aircraft through a mountain corridor with no radar and a fuel leak that's accelerating. 91 souls on board. Whoever she used to be, she needs help right now. Ibarra nodded slowly, even though no one could see him. Copy. Patch me directly to Falcon 2. Above the ridgeline, Sondheim and Basra flew tight formation on either side of the 787. Close enough now that Sondheim could make out, through the cockpit glass, a figure at the controls with a stillness that looked less like calm and more like discipline carved from something much older than the moment demanded. 447, Falcon 2, we have you in sight. Wingtip to wingtip. Your heading and altitude look stable, but be advised your right engine is showing visible fuel vapor discharge. Renata's voice came back level. Copy, Falcon 2, we're aware, crossfeed isolated, working the leak. Appreciate the escort. Sondheim keyed her mic to answer, then paused as Ibarra's voice cut in on the command channel, addressing the cockpit directly for the first time. 447, this is Colonel Marcus Ibarra, Elmridge Command. Captain Cole, is that really you? The cockpit went quiet for a beat too long. Dale glanced sideways at his captain, confused by the sudden formality crackling through the escort frequency, unaware he was witnessing the collision of two entirely separate lives. Renata's jaw tightened, just slightly, the first crack in 20 years of careful composure. Elmridge Command, this is Cole, she said finally, voice steady but quieter than before. It's been a long time, Colonel. Ibarra's exhale was audible even over the radio. We buried an empty casket for you, Captain. Kestrel Ridge, 2003. I signed a stand-down order myself. I know, Renata said. I never blamed you for it. In the cockpit, Dale's confusion deepened into something closer to disbelief. Captain, what is happening right now? Kestrel Ridge? What is he talking about? Renata didn't look at him, eyes fixed forward, hands steady on the controls despite everything colliding at once. It's a conversation for after we're on the ground, Dale. Right now, I need you running that fuel calculation every 60 seconds, not asking questions about my history. He complied, though his hands shook slightly doing it, the weight of the moment pressing down even as the aircraft itself demanded every ounce of attention. Outside, Sondheim watched the exchange unfold over her headset with growing astonishment, realizing she was flying wing on a woman whose name belonged, by every official record in existence, to the dead. Behind her, Basra's voice came through low. Falcon 2, did the colonel just call that pilot a ghost? Sondheim didn't answer. She didn't have one. 447, I need to verify something, and I apologize for the timing. Ibarra's voice came through, rougher now with emotion he was visibly struggling to keep out of a command channel. Your old cosine. Say it for me. Renata closed her eyes for half a second, the only outward sign in the entire flight that anything had truly rattled her. Marlowe, she said. Call sign Marlowe, Kestrel Ridge Extraction Wing, 2003. A long silence followed, filled only by static and the low hum of two damaged engines. Then Ibarra's voice again, thick now, no longer purely professional. Marlowe, God, we searched 6 days for you. I read your name at 3 separate memorials. I know, Renata said again, softer this time. I read about them years later. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I made it out. In the cockpit, Dale stared at his captain like he was seeing an entirely different person occupy the same seat. You were missing in action? For real? This whole time you've been flying commercial and nobody knew. Renata's eyes flicked to him briefly, something almost gentle in them despite the crisis unfolding around them both. The Air Force offered me anonymity instead of a headline. I took it. Flying this job let me keep flying without becoming a story. Outside the cockpit glass, Sondheim watched the aircraft hold its heading with the same eerie precision from before and understood now completely why. Falcon 2 to all units, she transmitted quietly to her own command, unable to keep the disbelief fully out of her voice. We've got Marlowe up here. She's alive, and she's flying that airliner home. The name rippled through Elmridge's operations center within minutes. Marlowe, a call sign some of the older personnel remembered from stories told in hushed, reverent tones, a pilot whose skill during the Kestrel Ridge operation had become something close to legend among a narrow circle who'd actually been there. A staff sergeant who'd served under Ibarra for a decade turned to him, stunned. "Sir, the Marlowe? The one from the extraction briefings we studied in training." Ibarra nodded once, still visibly shaken. "The same. On the aircraft, the reveal rippled differently, quietly, intimately, confined to a cockpit and a radio frequency most of the passengers behind the curtain would never know existed." Priya, unaware of any of it, continued moving through the cabin, reassuring frightened passengers, her own composure holding through sheer professional will. The student in 14C asked if the plane was going to be okay, and Priya, without knowing the full truth, answered with more confidence than she expected to feel. "The pilot flying us home today," she said, "is the best there is." She had no idea how literally true that sentence was about to become. Up front, Dale watched his captain field a conversation with a decorated Air Force colonel, while simultaneously running fuel calculations, correcting heading, and monitoring a hydraulic system still fluctuating dangerously. "Captain," he said quietly, "I've flown with you for 8 months. I had no idea." Renata allowed herself the smallest flicker of a smile, gone almost as fast as it appeared. Most people don't need to know what someone used to be. They need to know what she can do right now. Then the fuel gauge dropped again, sharper this time, and there was no more room for reflection. 447, fuel remaining now critical. Estimate 8 minutes before we lose functional range for Bell Rock, Dale reported, voice tight with the return of real fear now that the shock of the reveal had settled into something more immediate. Renata's focus snapped fully back to the crisis. The conversation with Ibarra folded away into a compartment she'd trained herself to build decades earlier. "Copy. Falcon 2, Marlowe requesting a read on terrain clearance ahead. Our systems are unreliable for that corridor." Sondheim answered immediately, the earlier astonishment replaced now by pure operational focus. "Copy, Marlowe. Terrain ahead rises sharply at your 11 o'clock. Recommend 2-degree course correction south. That puts you on the most direct glide path to Bell Rock if your remaining engine loses power entirely." "Copy. Coming right 2 degrees, Renata said, hands moving with the fluid economy of someone who had made corrections like this under far worse circumstances, in aircraft that offered no forgiveness for hesitation. Ibarra's voice cut back in, quieter now, more personal. "Marlowe, Bell Rock's runway is short for an aircraft your size, but Elmridge has emergency crash crews standing by regardless, and I am not losing you twice." Something in Renata's chest tightened at that, briefly, before she pushed it aside the way she'd pushed aside every feeling that threatened to slow her hands during a crisis. "Copy, Colonel. Let's not make that a habit." Behind her, Dale watched the exchange with something between awe and disbelief, finally understanding that the calm, unshakable woman he'd flown beside for months had been carrying an entire hidden life this whole time, one that had just resurfaced exactly when 91 strangers needed it most. With Bell Rock 8 minutes out and fuel margins shrinking by the second, Renata took full command of the descent with a clarity that silenced every remaining doubt in the cockpit. "Dale, I need you running approach speed and configuration, not questions. We'll talk about everything else on the ground." He nodded, snapping fully into focus, following her instructions now without the friction of the morning's misplaced confidence. "Falcon 2, Marlowe, requesting you confirm Bell Rock runway length and current wind. Our onboard weather data is unreliable." Sondheim related instantly, precise numbers that matched almost exactly what Renata had already estimated using dead reckoning and instinct. Ibarra came back on the channel one more time before handing full coordination to the tower. "Marlowe, Bell Rock crash crews are in position. Runway foam trucks standing by as precaution, and Falcon Flight will escort you all the way to touchdown." "Copy, Colonel. Appreciate the company." In the cabin, Priya moved through final brace positions with practiced calm, though her voice trembled slightly for the first time all flight. The student in 14C gripped her hand suddenly, unprompted, and Priya squeezed back without breaking her reassuring tone. Up front, Renata configured the aircraft for approach, hydraulic system holding just barely, fuel gauge reading numbers so low the calculation felt more like faith than physics. Gear down, she called, voice absolutely level. Flaps 25. We're going to fly this exactly like every approach we've ever made. Nothing about today changes how we land an airplane. Dale, steadier now than he'd been in 20 minutes, answered simply, "Copy, Captain," and meant every part of that word differently than he had that morning. The final approach into Bell Rock Regional unfolded in silence, broken only by essential calls. Altitude, airspeed, configuration, each one delivered by Renata with the flat precision of someone who had landed far worse aircraft in far worse conditions and simply refused to let today be different. Sondheim and Basra flew tight formation alongside, close enough that passengers pressing faces to windows could see the F-16's wingtips seemingly close enough to touch, a sight that spread a strange, unexpected calm through the cabin rather than panic. 447 on glide path, on speed. Looking good, Sondheim called, her voice carrying a quiet respect that hadn't been there an hour earlier. At 200 feet, the remaining engine coughed once, fuel starvation finally catching up to the aircraft's dwindling reserves, and Dale's hand shot toward the controls before catching himself. "Captain, I've got it," Renata said, voice utterly unshaken, adjusting pitch by a fraction, trading altitude for the last of the airspeed she needed. The runway grew large in the windshield, foam trucks lining both sides in a precaution nobody wanted to need. 50 feet. 30. Flare. The main gear touched down with a firmness that rattled the cabin, but held true, followed a heartbeat later by the nose gear, settling as Renata brought the throttles back and applied brakes with a measured pressure that stopped the aircraft with almost surgical control. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the cockpit spoke. Then Dale exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for the entire descent. "We're down," he said, disbelief and relief tangled together in his voice. "Captain, we're actually down." Renata allowed herself, finally, one slow breath of her own. The cabin erupted the moment the aircraft rolled to a stop. Not panic now, but a ragged wave of relieved applause, scattered sobs, strangers gripping hands they'd been holding since the descent began. Priya moved down the aisle with tears she no longer bothered hiding, checking on each row, repeating the same phrase over and over. "We made it. We're safe. We made it." The student in 14C hugged her flattened stuffed elephant to her chest and finally let herself cry, the fear she'd been swallowing for 20 minutes breaking loose all at once. Outside, emergency crews approached cautiously, foam trucks flanking the aircraft as a precaution that, in the end, proved unnecessary. The landing had been clean enough that no fire, no rupture, no catastrophe followed the fuel-starved touchdown. Above the runway, Falcon 2 and Falcon 4 executed a slow, respectful pass before breaking off toward Elm Ridge, Sondheim's voice coming through one final time on the escort frequency. 447, that was the finest emergency landing I've witnessed in 12 years of flying. "Welcome back, Marlowe." Renata, still seated in the cockpit as ground crews began their post-landing procedures, allowed the words to land fully for the first time since the radio call had started this entire unraveling. Dale turned to her, voice quiet now, stripped of every trace of the morning's overconfidence. "You just landed a fuel-starved 787 with no radar and failing hydraulics like it was a routine Tuesday. And apparently you did things like this for a living once, under a name I've never heard until today." Renata finally allowed herself a small, tired smile. "It was Tuesday," she said. "The rest is a longer conversation." Colonel Marcus Ibarra was waiting on the tarmac when the aircraft door finally opened, standing a respectful distance back as Renata descended the stairs, still in her captain's uniform, the weight of 2 decades visible in the careful way she moved. He didn't salute. He simply stepped forward and extended a hand, then abandoned that formality halfway through and pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace instead. 22 years, he said, voice rough. "I gave a eulogy for you." "I read about it," Renata said quietly. "I'm sorry it took a fuel leak for me to finally say something." Nearby, Sondheim and Basra had landed and walked over, still in flight suits, watching the reunion with the particular reverence of pilots meeting a name they'd only known from stories. Sondheim extended her hand next. "Major Sondheim." "It's an honor, ma'am." "Genuinely." Renata shook it, studying the younger pilot's face. Sharp, capable, carrying the same quiet steel Renata remembered feeling at that age, before the world asked her to disappear entirely to keep serving it. "The honor's mine, Major." That escort saved more than my nerves today. Behind them, passengers filed off the aircraft in small, shaken clusters, many pausing to look back at the crew that had brought them down safely. Priya guided the student from 14C toward her waiting parents, the girl still clutching her flattened elephant, now clearly a keepsake rather than a comfort object. Dale stood near the aircraft stairs, watching his captain speak with a colonel and a decorated fighter pilot like old colleagues reunited after a long deployment, still processing that the woman he'd underestimated all morning had, in fact, been quietly extraordinary the entire time. In the hours that followed, Bell Rock Regional's small operations building filled with a strange mixture of federal investigators, airline representatives, and off-duty Air Guard personnel who'd heard the name Marlowe pass through the base radio net and simply had to see for themselves whether the story was real. Renata answered every official question calmly, gave her statement to the NTSB investigator with the same measured precision she'd used flying the approach, and quietly declined every request for a longer interview about Kestrel Ridge. "That story belongs to the people who didn't come home," she told Ibarra privately. "I'd rather not be the headline instead of them." He respected it, though he made her promise, before she left, to finally sit down with him and tell him everything, off the record, the way old friends owed each other after 22 years of unfinished grief. Dale found her near the operations building exit, hesitating before speaking. "Captain, Renata, I need to apologize. I trusted the automation over you all morning, and if today taught me anything, it's that instinct built over decades beats a screen that goes dark exactly when you need it most." Renata studied him for a moment, seeing the same overconfidence she'd once carried herself, softened now by exactly the kind of humility that made pilots better, not worse. "You'll be a good captain someday, Dale. Just remember what almost happened up there, and remember it wasn't the airplane that got us down. It was refusing to panic when the airplane stopped being enough." He nodded, something settling in a place in him that would likely shape the rest of his career. Outside, the sun was beginning to set behind the ridgeline, painting the runway gold, and for the first time in 22 years, Renata Cole stood in the open without hiding a single part of who she really was. 3 weeks later, Renata Cole flew Continental Sky 447 again. Same route, same aircraft type, a different tail number this time, Dale seated beside her as first officer, quieter now, more deliberate, checking instruments with the same care he'd learned to respect the hard way. The story of what happened over the Cascades had leaked in careful, incomplete pieces, enough for passengers to occasionally recognize her name, not enough to turn her into the story she'd spent 2 decades avoiding. She preferred it that way. Colonel Ibarra called every few weeks now, old friendship rebuilding itself slowly, the way things do when people choose to show up for each other again after long absence. Major Sondheim sent a short message once, simply thanking her for showing an entire younger generation of pilots what quiet competence actually looked like under real pressure. Renata kept it, filed away like the notebook in her breast pocket, private and unshowy. Somewhere over the same stretch of mountains where a fuel leak and a dead radar screen had once nearly written a very different ending, she leveled the aircraft at cruise altitude and let herself feel, briefly, the particular piece of a sky she'd fought hard to keep flying in. If there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this: the loudest person in the room is rarely the most capable one, and the quiet one sitting beside you may be carrying more strength than you'll ever know until the moment truly demands it. If this story moved you even a little, consider sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that real heroes rarely announce themselves. And if you want more stories like Renata's, stick around. There are more names still waiting to come back to the sky.